Welcome, everybody, to the Zion Experience. I'm Jim Shaw. I forget Jordan. Jordan Frank, the other co-host, is on.
I'm here.
You know, we really don't prepare for this. You know, we're better off to come. That's about all you're going to get.
That's what I got.
I have ham and cheese loaf in the refrigerator for days like today.
With that, let's get back into it.
Let's get in our groove.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Jordan. I'm here with Christian on another episode of the Zion Experience. We have no Jimmy today. He's taken an off episode, but today we're going to be talking about sorters. Christian is thrilled as our director of engineering to be on the podcast talking about sortation. So excited to get his opinion and insight on the different types of sortation options that are out there, when we use them, why we use them, who we use, and see what kind of tidbits we can get out of today's episode. But Christian, I know you're really excited. So do you want to start with kind of some opening thoughts?
Well, my opening thought was on the intro. It said, we do not prepare for this. So
Yes.
Not that we really need to. We're talking about sortation. I think a lot of us have been around it for as long as we've been in distribution centers. So
I think it's fair to say you've been preparing for the past 10 years
right.
to talk about sorters, right?
Right.
Yeah. Before we do get into it, out of curiosity, of all the sorters you've ever solutioned, what, as of today, is your favorite to solution and implement?
My favorite, absolutely, the robotic sortation. I don't know if I'd say it's leading edge today because there's quite a bit out there, but I mean, it's absolutely fun to see once it's up and running, to see the robots just not run into each other, especially when you've got 50 plus out there just in a grid running around. It's kind of exciting to see.
It is pretty cool to see, isn't it? Like when you've got 50, 60, 100, small, big, whatever they may be, the fact that, you know, a lot of them are QR based to run around, but still you think about some of the simulations we have to do and the algorithms to drive them, and the fact that we don't have them run into each other. It used to be more of an issue, but I feel like it's been solved.
We've seen it happen.
Sure.
We've seen it happen, but it's fun to see when they're all in sync and running like they should be.
Yeah, gotcha. All right. Well, I think what we'll do is we will get into robotic sorters and talk more about it and talk through some of the examples where we think they make sense. And like Christian said, this is not a pre-planned, prepared episode with canned answers. We're going to kind of walk through these and we'll see how it guides us. But really the intent today is just to talk through. We have the fortunate opportunity to see a lot of different sorters out in the warehouse, and we get to solution a lot of the different types, and we get to implement them. And there's sortation for a whole variety of reasons. I think people typically think sorters, they think outbound sortation for, you know, if it's zone skipping or if it's for palletizing or whatever it may be. But we use sorters in and throughout the warehouse for a variety of different reasons, including routing, including inbound, including returns, including load balancing, packing, shipping, you name it. Sorters are still a very viable option that, you know, there are some more innovative, flexible sortation options, but they're still the tried and true that provide a very good value. And we want to make sure we talk about all of those. But back to what I was saying, I think the intent today is just to give the audience an understanding of the different types of sorters we see, when we think they make sense, why we use them, and just our general thoughts. So, you know, I think the first thing I'll start off with, Christian, is, and just for everyone to know, Christian is our director of solutions and engineering. The reason we have solutions and engineering is some of you out there know that there's times where you just want to bounce some ideas off of somebody. You want to get some concepts, you want to get some budgets, and you want to help qualify whether or not it's a fit to pursue further, whether you be a 3PL or an end user, whoever you are. Sometimes you just don't know what the cost is. So Christian has a team that is able to quickly take some inputs and give you some ideas and thoughts of, here's the route we would go, here's the timeline, here's the budget. And if that makes sense, then our engineering team would take over and really go into the fine details and firm pricing. But Christian oversees both groups. And Christian, when you're starting off, you're talking to someone, and let's say that we're doing some sort of project that does involve sortation, what are some of the key considerations or inputs that you're either looking to get from the customer or you're looking to get from the data they provide?
Yeah, I mean, first is rate, right? Volume. How many units or how many parcels or how many totes do I need to, either sort, right? So how much is going to be on the conveyor? That's obviously number one. You have a wide range of types of sorters, ranging from, say, 10 to 15 parts per minute, all the way up to 120 plus parts per minute, 300 plus even, if you get into small unit sorters. So that's always the first, right? And then the next thing is, what are we conveying? So, are we conveying an actual unit, or are we conveying a carton or a tote or a poly bag, or even, different types of kind of poly mailers, envelopes, a bunch of different types of things. So that's next, I'd say most important is what are we conveying? And then another one is, do we need some type of scanner? Do we need a weigh before we go into there? There's a lot of little things where we got to pull a gap, and sometimes you got to run conveyor at a certain speed based on the gaps that you got to create. So those are some of the finer details. We don't always look at those in solutions, but really in solutions we look at rate, and we look at what are we conveying. Those are really the two.
Yeah, and I think, when we're looking at different solutions, we always try to drive a solution that isn't designed for that peak day. However, when it comes to sortation, I think it's a little bit of a different story in terms of peak does matter. And I think there's some reasons behind that. So I don't know if you could share some of your thoughts of, I know when
especially
data,
yeah, especially when you get into like traditional sorters, like your narrow belt, your shoe sorter, your cross belt tilt tray sorters. You can't go in and really add more volume to those. You can maybe on some of the unit sorters add some additional index, but for the most part, those are going to be running at the speed that they're set at. The horsepower is going to be designed for whatever volume we're trying to hit. So for those, definitely, you're going to want to design for peak. There's really no other way around it. If you want to put all of that volume on that sorter for peak, you've got to design it for that. Other areas, and maybe a little early talking about robotic sortation, but when you get to those peak times, potentially you can add more bots or add more induction stations during those. Again, it's hard if it's hard sometimes even on those, because you don't want to put some bots in just for the peak and things like that. But for the most part, with sortation, unlike your goods to person systems and person to goods systems and other kind of picking automation out there, you're usually designing for peak.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is beyond just peak, it's also looking out to the design year, right? Because I think one thing that we'll tell anybody is there's certainly things that you can add and that you can enhance, and that I could always add another conveyor line somewhere, but coming in and replacing a sorter is never fun. It provides a lot of risk. It has a lot of pain. There will be downtime. So it's one of those areas I think you have to know where you're going and where you want to end up as part of the design consideration to make sure that you're set up for long-term success. And then certainly I think there's opportunities that if you've got explosive growth that's planned but not yet realized, that might be another opportunity to look at either robotic sortation, or maybe it's a separate sorter of some sort. But I think the thing that always kind of trips people up when we're talking about them is once you put a sorter in, and let's say it's rated to do 50 cartons a minute, that's what it can do, and you want to grow it to 60 or 65 or 70. Some people think, well, hey, why can I just add another sorter? And then there's times that you can. However, what you have to think about is, where is the product coming from? Because if it's coming from the same area, and then I want to split that volume out between sorter 1 and sorter 2, well, that's called a pre-sort, which is great, but your pre-sort has to be rated to take on that whole volume. And when you start to get to a certain level of volume, you start to get into more high-end sorters. Higher-end sorters typically cost quite a bit more. And I think that brings me to my next question is, earlier you were talking about poly bags. That's been a hot topic for quite a few years now, in terms of bag sortation is different than carton sortation. Bag sorters can usually sort cartons. Carton sorters can't always sort bags. So when we're looking at speccing out some type of sort that does require poly bags, can you talk through the different tiers based on rates and type of sorters that we would typically look like? What are those break points of when you go from one
Yeah,
sorter?
I'll throw out 3 or 4, I guess. I mean, first one will be low level, 24 volt, Regal mod sort is where we like to start. So you're going to get, up to about 30 there. Then a
30 a minute, right?
30, yeah, 30 bags a minute there. So that's kind of the first starting point we always begin at. Then from there, you've got interlocks. So interlocks is kind of like you kind of got rollers that are I guess ignited underneath the belt that will transfer those bags down your diverts. So there you get up to 60 plus a minute. So that's kind of your next tier. And then I know the shoe sorter technology has gone a pretty long way the past few years. There are some shoe sorters that we've seen run bags. We typically don't like to design them. We try to stay away as much as we can, because you're still going to have some, no matter what you do, and especially poly bags, you can get away with it a little better if you're doing some of the poly millers or bubble millers. But with poly bags, we like to stay away from the shoe sorter. But we have seen it done. But then you've got the cross belt sorters or tilt tray sorters. So that's kind of your very top tier. 90 plus a minute, 100 plus a minute, kind of in that range. We look at the cross belt sorter. So I'd say that's kind of the 3 to 4 tier of polybag sorters.
Nope, totally agree. And I'm still here. I'm just having some camera issues, so bear with me, but I'll keep talking. And I think when we look at those different sorters as well, I think it's okay to educate, typically the cost points that we see. So when you start at the lower level, let's just say 8 diverts, right? I mean, I think it's fair to say you're typically in a $750,000 to $1 million range, depending on the type of scanners that you need, whether or not you need a dimensioner, whether or not you need an inline scale, of course, the number of divert points, and then it kind of iterates up from there. I mean, I think when you get to your high-end cross-belt sortation, you're probably in that $2.5 to $3 million range. It's just a number to throw out there for people to think about, because the kind of stuff we look at when we're trying to qualify what type of sorter makes sense. But and I think the other thing you can talk to, Christian, is when you do get into the higher end sorters, let's say you are doing 80 or 90 a minute, I think there's some unique things we can do specifically with like cross belt sortation in terms of a multi-use sorter. So do you want to kind of talk through how we try to make the most out of those types of sorters?
Yeah, if we talk specifically about kind of the loop sorter, you'll hear people say, so it could be a cross belt, tilt tray, whatever. Typically we do a lot of cross belts. So I'll just talk about the loop sorter, cross belt, another term, horizontal cross belt, I guess you'd say. So one thing you do with those is we call them virtual sorters. So you can really split those sorters up in really ever how many virtual sorters you want. Obviously, there's a length limitation that the sorter can be, but essentially what you'll have is a set of inducts going into that sorter. And, those set of inducts will be for, say those set of inducts are for your shipping sorter. So you'll induct your shipping cartons on that set of inducts, and they'll go down and hit all of your shipping chutes or shipping lanes down to that area. But one thing nice about these loop sorters is now you've got, all that loop that comes back around to those inducts. So what do I do with that? I mean, those are typically going to be, you'll have some recirc. So we plan for like 5% recirc or whatever, but most of those containers there are going to be empty. So how do we use those? So right after we get all those packages off the shipping or the shipping area, we can add a whole nother set of inducts. And a lot of times we'll use this for routing, or maybe you got a whole new line for your LTL, say coming from a different area. So we can use this next section of inducts for routing or palletization or something like that, and have a whole nother set of diverts coming off of that side. So you essentially taken this sorter that can do 120 cartons per minute, and you split it into to 2 different sorters, and now you got 240 cartons per minute.
Right.
Sorter.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think the key there is that we try to do what we can whenever we can to make the most out of those types of sorters, because I think a sweet spot, or not a sweet spot, but a gap is when you really go from 60 or so, Christian, for the bag side. When you get above 60, you're really forced into starting to use those types of sorters. And so you want to make the most out of it. But, if we kind of go back, I'm going to save robotic sortation for the last, because I think it kind of covers all areas of sortation. But I think another area that we see, and I don't know that we see it quite as much as we used to, but is unit sortation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we looked at unit sortation in the past, a lot of times it would be for a lot of times in apparel, in kind of a batch operation, whether it be a store fulfillment or whether it be a unit sort of a shoot down to a put wall. But I still think every now and then we'll come across some unit sorters. We've done a few here and there, but when do you think that unit sortation starts to become an option that may make sense?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I mean, if I throw a current project we're working on right now, so this specific customer has things come inbound that are mixed SKU. So every single case that comes in is mixed SKU. So we don't want to put those away mixed SKU. So what do? We need to sort the like SKUs together and prepare those for put away. So essentially what we're doing is, I want to throw out a partner name of ours, but we're looking at OPEX SureSort, a lot of their systems there, and we're going to open those cartons, throw the SKU on there, and they're going to sort by SKU. So, there's a wide range of unit sorters, right? So you've got kind of that smaller systems like OPEX SureSort, or you've got Adverb Zippy, and you've got Tompkins T-Sort, little unit sorters like that. So, those are kind of getting in the robotic systems as well, but they're also unit sorters.
Right. When you're looking at those, so I've got an inbound operation, I've got mixed SKUs coming in. To your point, we don't want to put away that product as mixed SKU, because it's going to create a lot of inefficiency downstream when it goes time to either replenish or pick, depending on what they're doing with that case. So how would I know that unit sortation would make sense? In other words, why not just take the units out and kind of sort them individually? What would push me toward
your labor? Yeah. So, I mean, you look at your labor, right? How many people do I have doing this? If you only have a few people doing this, then yeah, it might not be worth looking at it. But this specific customer had 40 plus people on the inbound side just sorting product.
And what would you expect? So that's a lot of people. And so when you look at something like a SureSort, as an example, what kind of unit induct rate are you expecting to get with a piece of equipment like that?
Yeah, so I like to start at 800 units per hour is kind of where I like to start. OPEX we've seen get up to 1,200 or so an hour. That's moving. I think they've even had some even higher than that, but that's where I like to sit, is about 800 to 1,200 units per hour. So I mean that's
okay.
That's really
it makes sense. I mean, it's certainly be a lot faster than someone doing it in a manual environment, and also it's going to depend on the number of units within that case and how many different sort points would have to consolidate to. It's a lot different if it's 2 SKUs per case versus 20 SKUs per case, as an example, right?
Yeah.
And when you're looking at unit sorters, what are some of the key requirements that you need to make sure that you have specific when I'm specifically talking about unit sortation?
Well, obviously the size of the unit, right? So there's, even within just the unit sortation systems, you've got a bunch of different size. Even if you look at Crossbelt, like Interroll is kind of our main go-to partner for Crossbelt sorters. If you look at them, they have a bunch of different carrier sizes. There's limitations on different ones on the size of products. So that would be one thing. The big thing that's going to prove out an ROI for a unit sorter is the number of destinations. So if you have a lot of destinations you need to sort to, then a unit sorter is really going to help you with your efficiencies on that.
Barcodes, right? You got to have barcodes. So I think that's a big thing with units, is that if you're, there's ways around it. right? Like if I'm doing a full case induct where I want to just sort out units, or if I have a tote and I can take that LPN and I've got single SKUs inside of it, whatever it may be, that's a way to transfer that information to the unit sorter. If I have to have a way to associate that unit via a scan point, right? So that's something to think about. If you are thinking about, hey, man, I deal with a lot with returns and I want to be able to sort these out because I want to put them away by like SKUs or whatever it may be, something to keep in mind is that we do need some way to understand what unit I am or that I'm looking at, right?
Yeah, and so sometimes we can get away with like smaller stuff that's not allowed to have a barcode or can't have a barcode on it. If it's a single SKU case, we can scan that case and sort by that. But yeah, I mean, you need a barcode of some sort somewhere that you can scan.
Yeah, and going back to size that you talked about, not specific to unit sorters, but I'm specifically now thinking about like a sliding shoe sorter. So our main conveyor and sortation partner is Hytrol, and I think the Hytrol Pro Sort sorters has some unique ability when it comes to the size of product. Can you talk through kind of the min and max ranges that we can do with those Pro Sorts?
I've got people on my team that can tell you those probably from memory. I know that we've done a couch on a shoe sorter.
Yeah.
So I know that we've done that, and I know we've done down to polybag type sizes on a shoe sorter. So that's nice flexibility about that, is just the wide range of, I mean, you can go literally from credit card size up to a couch like we
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what's unique about them, is that it's heavy product, big product. I think the guidance there is don't immediately assume that your product can't be sorted. Now, yes, you do get to a certain point if it's long and skinny, or if it's really wide and like there's things that may impact it, but they do have a very wide array of sizes and weights that they can accommodate. And there are times where it may make sense to have a dedicated bulk sorter and a dedicated small sorter, whatever it may be. But it's pretty interesting the amount of sizes they can handle through their different Pro Sort ranges.
Right.
Okay, so I think we talked about some of the conveyor sorters, and I think just to list them off, I mean, I think we deal with anything from the mod sort to a MDR 30-degree sorter, which is kind of what some people call a pop-up wheel divert, to narrow belt sorters, both 30 and 90 degrees, to interlocks type sortation with their ARB line, to interroll, to tilt tray, to there's a lot of different varieties out there, but I think we've seen solutioned or sized pretty much every sorter that's out there when it comes to, let's just call it your conveyor and your typical sortation types. Now, one area, and you mentioned as your favorite to talk about earlier, is robotic sortation. So give me some different examples of robotic sortation and when you think it may or may not make sense.
Yeah, so the first time or kind of the first reason that it makes sense is you don't want to spend the upfront capital on your 10-year plan. You want to grow into it. So, start small with a robotic sortation system, and then it's easily expandable. So that's the number one reason, I think you look at that is just the ability to expand, add in robots as needed. You don't have that single point of failure. If a robot goes down, your other robots, pick them up. So that's the first reason. The next reason is really the amount of destinations. So anytime, in a traditional sorter, anytime you add a destination, you're adding all that extra hardware. So you've got a switch, you've got, spur, curve, down lane, installation controls, everything that involves adding that in. A robot can really go to any point in your warehouse and, divert that product off of it. So that's the nice thing about those is very cheap to add a destination. I mean, it might be as easy as putting a Gaylord on the ground, and that's your destination, and you divert off into that Gaylord. So not much cost there, except maybe a photo eye that you made a divert and you've got a Gaylord there or something. So those are really the two reasons, is you're looking maybe to start smaller and grow, or you've got, a bunch of different destinations that you need to sort to, and just that robotic sort can do that really easily.
Yeah, and I think to that point, going back to your first option of the growth and the flexibility, we've worked with a lot of customers in the past that have had a very aggressive growth plan, but it's a plan. It's not reality, at least not yet. And in those situations where you might need to do 10 or 15 cartons a minute today, and by year 2032, you think you need to do 70 to 80. I think that'd be a prime example of where it's like, hey, let's grow as we realize that additional growth versus planning on having additional growth and potentially over engineering or underutilizing the system. I think the other thing about the multiple destinations is you can do a lot of destinations off of a traditional unit sorter, like a tilt tray or a cross belt. You're bidirectional, you can get close shoot centers, and you can really, you can get a lot of destinations. But I think, I'm just thinking out loud here, but I do think there's a space savings advantage to robotic sortation specific to kind of unit sortation and multi-destinations. I think you can fit a lot because you can go multi-level, you can have different spurs and different fingers. And so I don't know if you would agree, but certainly feels like there's some space savings opportunities.
Yeah, it depends. I think once you get to a certain volume, there's a volume where robotic sortation doesn't make sense, and you kind of just have to go to unit sorter just because the amount of robots to do the sort. You just have to have a super long grid or super big grid to hold all those robots. But yeah, in certain situations you will save space, but in other situations I've seen where the robotic sort, I'm thinking kind of parcel sortation. It takes up more space.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, there's a trade-off between like the size of the packages you have to sort and the number of destinations versus the size of units and your outbound destination size, whether it be a Gaylord or pallet, mixed with the inbound product size, whether it be a unit or a case, I think can lead you to a pretty big different size. In other words, if I'm doing a unit to an outbound carton versus if I'm doing a package to an outbound Gaylord, 200 destinations in the Gaylord environments can be far larger than 200 destinations in an outbound carton environment. Right. So, so I think, I think the point of all of this is there's a lot of different sorters out there that are meant for different reasons. And I think a lot of them can serve multiple purposes and solve multiple problems. So if someone's out there and they're trying to figure out, hey, I've got a lot of people in my outbound dock, I've got a lot of people in my inbound dock, or I've got a lot of different pick areas I want to connect, what's some advice you would give them in terms of, hey, I'm interested, but I don't know where to start? Like, where's a good starting point for people that are starting that journey?
I think I'm going to say get an integrator involved. Start, explain your processes to them, and we know sortation really well. We know where it makes sense.
Well, I think it's an important key there too, Christian, to that point. Sorry to cut you off, but you mentioned talk to an integrator. And I think, we've done our best to help explain what an integrator does. And I think most people in the market knows what an integrator is. But I think the key thing for people to know is you have different manufacturers out there. Some have a wide array of product ranges like Hytrol. They've got pop-up wheel sorters. They've got partnerships. They've got sliding shoe sorters. They got narrow belt sorters. And then you have other partners out there that we have that are really more purpose-built, like Intralox as an example. They have their ARB sorters. They have a lot of different product lines for singulation and a multitude of other things, but their primary core product is a activator roller belt sorter. And we use that a lot for bags or cartons, whatever it may be. And then like Mod Sort, right? Same kind of idea. They can solve a lot of different problems, but it's really a singular product that you can use in different ways. I think what an integrator allows you to do, and you can tell me if you agree, is through the different partnerships that we have or that other integrators may have, we can kind of look at all those different manufacturers out there. And just because you've got one version of conveyor doesn't necessarily mean that that's the sorter that you need. Or if you're talking to a robotic sort company, that doesn't mean that you can't use traditional conveyor. So I think that's where you get the best of both worlds, where it's, companies that are going out and looking across your entire facility. And I think it's important for you to understand, well, I think there's two pieces. There's not always going to be a return necessarily on an outbound sorter. In other words, you may not see an ROI. However, without that sorter, you may be unable to achieve your growth goals. Once you reach a certain rate, I think it becomes impossible or it becomes very difficult to maintain that rate in a manual environment. And if you want to leverage zone skipping to have transportation savings, or if you want to, if you're going to 100 cartons a minute and you've got 100 different pallets that you're going to, the space that you would need and the people you need in that case would prove out some sort of ROI. But I think it's important to understand that there's times where the sorter is purely needed to get the volume out the door that you need to get out.
Right.
Because without it, you're just unable to.
Yeah, to hit your SLAs. And there are costs to that, right? Those are sometimes hard to prove out what those costs are, but yeah.
Yeah, like in other words, it's a classic, what does it cost of doing nothing? Right? If I don't do anything, what is this going to cost me? Can I continue to hit my SLAs, or am I going to start to get penalized in the event of a 3PL or in the event of an end user? If I have a guaranteed ship date and I miss that date, am I going to lose a customer? And what does that cost? Because it costs something to lose a customer. It costs money to attain them, and it's going to cost you money to lose them. So I think those are all good points. I think we covered a lot of the different sorters out there. Any other thoughts from you before we wrap up here?
No.
Pretty harmless and easy.
Pretty harmless and easy.
Felt prepared.
Oh, I mean, like you said, 10 years of, in this business, sorters are one of the first things that you really learn, and what volumes each sorter can handle, what types of things that each sorter can handle. So just a little lesson for anyone new to the industry, any integrators out there listening, sorters, you need to know your sorters. So
yeah. All right. Well said. Well, thanks again for listening. Always here to answer any questions anyone may have. I'm sorry if you forgot any of our business partners. It wasn't intentional. It was just kind of a free-flowing conversation, but always a topic we enjoy talking about, and always a pleasure talking to you, Christian. So that's it. Thank you.
We want to thank you all for listening to another episode of the Zion Experience. Please make sure you subscribe to our show on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. If you have any ideas or topics you'd love to hear about, or maybe for a future episode, please let us know. Send us something in the comments. We appreciate you all, and we'll see you here next time.